Chapter 1. The Old King's Secret. Once upon a time, there was an old king who ruled over a great kingdom. He was loved by his people, but he had a big problem. He had no son to take over the throne. When he died, his people were very worried, as they didn't know who would be the next king. But before the old king died, he revealed a secret. He told his people that his only daughter, the princess, had a child. In secret, she married an ordinary man, and they had a son. Some people said her husband was an artist, and some said he was a musician. But his identity was a mystery, and nobody knew about their secret son. When the baby was only a week old, some men took him while his mother was sleeping. The princess died immediately after that. Some people said she died of sadness, and others said someone gave her poison in a cup of wine. The men left the baby with a very poor family who lived in the forest, and the boy grew up to become a shepherd. He looked after goats all day long. Meanwhile, the old king had made an important decision. The boy must be the new king when I die, he said. He sent his servants into the forest with a mission. Find the boy and bring him here. The servants found the boy and brought him to the palace. When the boy arrived, he was very happy. He immediately fell in love with all the beautiful things around him. He took off his old leather tunic and put on his fine new clothes. Then he began to explore the castle. He ran from room to room, admiring all the beautiful statues, paintings, and jewels in the palace. The people of the city talked about him. The young king spends all his time admiring statues. They said, beauty and art are the most important things for him. In fact, the young king was so fascinated with beautiful objects that he wanted more of them. He sent merchants to India to buy ivory and jade. He sent men to Persia for silk carpets, and others to find amber in the north. He even sent servants to look for green turquoise in the magic tombs of the Egyptian kings. The young king thought about all these things, but most of all he thought about his coronation robe. He was 16, and it was his coronation day the next day. He was very happy because he had a beautiful coronation robe of gold, a crown of rubies, and a scepter of pearls. He ordered men to work day and night to prepare his coronation robes. Search the whole world for the biggest rubies for my crown and the most beautiful pearl for my scepter. He said, the young king was in his beautiful bedroom, thinking about his coronation robes. It was night time, and he looked around him. The room was full of silver and gold and beautiful colors. Through the window, he could smell the perfume of jasmine. He could hear a nightingale singing, and he could see the moon shining. Servants arrived and put flower petals on his pillow. Tomorrow was his coronation day. He played beautiful music on his lute, and at midnight he closed his eyes and went to sleep. That night the young king had a dream. Chapter 2. The Dreams. In the young king's dream, he was in a dark building where people were working. They looked thin and tired, and some of them were children who looked sick. The young king was curious about what they were doing and asked one of the men. The man told him that they were making cloth for a rich man who was their master. They worked hard all day. But the master kept all the good things for himself, like wine and food, while they were left hungry and poor. The young king was shocked to hear this, and reminded the man that they lived in a free land, and no one should be anyone's slave. But the man told him that in times of peace, the poor were slaves to the rich. Suddenly, the young king noticed that the cloth they were making was gold, and it was for the coronation robe of the young king himself. This scared him so much that he woke up from his dream. The young king fell asleep again and had another dream. In this dream, he was on a boat with many slaves rowing it. The master of the boat was a black man with a red silk turban on his head, and he wore big silver earrings in his ears. The slaves were working hard, but someone was whipping them to work even harder. Finally, the boat arrived in a bay, and the master threw a rope ladder into the sea. They tied a heavy stone to the youngest slave and threw him into the sea. The young slave kept returning with beautiful pearls in his hand, and each time the master of the boat took the pearls and put them in a green bag. The last time the young slave came back, he was very pale and tired, and he had a beautiful pearl in his hand. But he fell and died, and the master of the boat took the pearl and threw the young slave's dead body into the sea. The pearl was for the scepter of the young king. The young king was terrified again and woke up, but he fell asleep one more time and had a third dream. In this dream, he was in a tropical forest full of strange fruit and poisonous flowers. There were snakes, parrots, monkeys, and peacocks everywhere. The young king saw many men digging in a dry river and cutting big rocks and stones. Death and Avarice were watching them, and Death asked Avarice to give him 1/3 of her men, but she refused because they were her servants. So Death sent Malaria to kill 1/3 of the men, but Avarice still refused to give Death any of her corn. Then Death sent Fever, who killed another 1/3 of the men, but Avarice still refused to give Death any of her corn. Finally, Death sent Plague, who killed the rest of the men, and Avarice ran away screaming into the forest. Then dragons and monsters came out of the rivers and valleys. The young king was confused and asked who those men were and what they were doing. A man in white appeared and told him that they were looking for rubies for a king's crown. The young king asked which king, and the man in white showed him a mirror. When the young king looked into the mirror, he saw his own face and realized that he was the king. He woke up and saw that the sun was shining at his window. It was his coronation day. Chapter 3. The Coronation. A servant came to the young king with his coronation clothes. They were pretty, but the king remembered his dreams. He said, "No, take these clothes away. I don't want to wear them." The servant was confused and asked if he was joking. The king explained his dreams, saying, "My robe holds sadness and pain. The rubies contain blood, and the pearl holds death." The servant urged him to forget his dreams, but the king refused. He put on his old tunic from the forest and took his shepherd's staff instead. "I came to the palace in these clothes, and I will leave in them too. Now I am ready for my coronation," he said. A servant asked about his crown, And the king took a briar of thorns from his balcony, saying, "This will be my crown." He rode his horse to the cathedral, and people laughed at him. They said, "This isn't the king, but his servant." He explained his dreams, but one man was angry and said, "Don't you know that rich people give poor people work? It's difficult to work for a hard master, but it's more difficult to work for no master. Please go back to the palace and wear your coronation clothes." The king replied, "The rich and the poor are brothers." The people laughed again. When he reached the great door of the cathedral, the soldiers stopped him, asking, "What do you want?" "Only the king can enter by this door." The king replied, "I am the king." The bishop saw him and asked, "Where is your crown? Where is your scepter?" The king told the bishop about his dreams, but the bishop said, "Listen to me, I am an old man. There are many bad things in the world, but you cannot change them all. Thieves, pirates, and beggars are too much for one person to change. Go back to the palace and wear your coronation clothes." But the king passed the bishop and entered the cathedral. He went to the altar and looked at the image of Christ. He saw the light of the candles and the smoke of the incense. Suddenly, a crowd of people with swords came into the cathedral. They were very angry and cried, "Where is this king dressed in beggar's clothes? We must kill him, because a beggar cannot rule us. He will be bad for our country." The king prayed silently in front of the altar, then turned and looked at the people sadly. At that moment, a ray of sun shone into the cathedral. It illuminated the young king at the altar. The sun made a beautiful robe around him. Red roses grew on his dry crown of thorns, and white lilies grew on his staff. The roses were redder than rubies, and the lilies were whiter than pearls. Music started to play, and voices began to sing. The glory of God filled the cathedral. The people knelt down. "He is crowned by someone greater than me," the bishop said, and he knelt in front of the king. The boy came from the altar and passed the people, but they didn't have the courage to look at his face, because it was the face of an angel.